Hello, in this lesson, we are going to be looking at things that students commonly overlook when it comes to exams. So, our session objectives for this lesson are that we are going to identify common details and marks that students often overlook in their essays. We are going to understand how to avoid these pitfalls and maximize your potential marks. We are going to learn strategies to ensure you address the full range of the assessment objectives to the AOs. So welcome to today's session on the easy marks that students often miss. Whether you are aiming for a grade 5 or a grade 9, it's essential to cover all aspects of the question, and we are going to attempt to do that in this session. By the end of this lesson, you'll know the common pitfalls to avoid and how you ensure your essay hits all the marks. So the first thing that students often do is that they misread the question, and it's more common than you think. I have read hundreds of essays where students have overlooked an aspect of the question or they've misread the question, and many students lose marks because they misinterpret or overlook keywords in the question. So it's really, really, really important that you read the question carefully and you look out for the command words. So pay attention to the focus words of the question. I know you hear people talk about this all the time, but look for those command words first of all and make sure you are clear on the theme or character or focus of the question before you start planning, because they are going to tell you exactly what you need to do. So as an example, in the 2024 summer exam series, the question was about Mrs. Burling, and many students answered on Mr. Burling. And how Mr. Burling was presented in spectacles rather than Mrs. Burling. And failing to mention the named character or theme results in missed marks for AO1, that is response to task. And then as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, or for any grade, make sure you highlight the keywords in the question during your exam. And if it's a comparison, ensure every paragraph links both texts explicitly. So highlight those keywords in the question during your exam, like at the beginning. But what I also mean by that, in terms of aiming for a grade 8 or grade 9, if we're thinking about the conceptualized response, and we are going to go over that in detail in another lesson, you want to be returning to the focus of the question. So when I say highlight, I don't just mean literally highlight. I mean highlight that throughout your essay with that conceptual thread that runs throughout your essay. Next of all, skipping conclusions. Students always say to me, do I need a conclusion? Now, if you're aiming for top grades, the answer is yes, because you need to start strong with your strong thesis statement and introduction, and then you need to end your essay by reflecting on what you've said, considering whether the writer has achieved their intentions. And a strong conclusion ties your whole essay together. Skipping or rushing it can leave your essay feeling unfinished. And a top grade conclusion does not repeat your introduction, but summarizes your argument and leaves a lasting impact, considering whether the writer's aims have been achieved. And as an example, a weak conclusion might simply restate ambition is important in Macbeth. However, a stronger conclusion would explore the writer's intentions and the lasting message of the text. So something along the lines of, ultimately, Shakespeare suggests that unchecked ambition, when combined with power, leads to moral and psychological downfall. And that would be sort of the beginning of a strong conclusion. You don't need to write a huge amount more than that. You might want to be a bit more evaluative than that, but that is how you could start it to ensure that you have a stronger conclusion. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, use your conclusion to reflect on the wider implications of your argument and the wider implications of the character or the theme and the text. What's the writer's message to the audience or society? That bigger message that you will have addressed in your introduction if you're attempting to deliver a conceptualized response throughout your essay to hit the top of the mark scheme. Now, another thing that students often overlook is missing context. So many students either skip context entirely or add it in as an afterthought, as a bolt-on, resulting in a loss of easy AO3 marks. Now, AO3 is your context, the contextual factors, the background of the text that is relevant to what you are trying to say, not just sort of irrelevant contextual details and biographical details, but it must be relevant to the argument that you're presenting. And good use of context involves weaving it into your analysis, not just tacking it on the end of a paragraph. So that's what I mean when I say bolting it on. So in your analysis of the language, of the ideas, you may want to link in the context there. It doesn't have to be very formulaic. And that's why we say that sometimes these structures for paragraphs, whether it's PE, Peel, Peter, Petal, whatever it is, they can be restricting sometimes because they can lead to context just being bolted on at the end, where actually it may be important to put context in your point, or it might be important to put context in your analysis of language. So think about where you're placing the context and use context to extend your thinking, and as I said, not as a bolt-on. So as an example, instead of simply saying Shakespeare wrote Macbeth for King James I, you could try saying Shakespeare's presentation of Macbeth's downfall would have resonated with King James I's views on the divine right of kings, reinforcing the notion that is the idea that rebellion against divine authority is a path to destruction. So using that context to develop your ideas and really exploring the context in more detail than one simple statement. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, aim to integrate context seamlessly. Ask yourself, how does the context enhance my understanding of this moment of the text? And the next thing that students often overlook is a lack of, or don't include, is a lack of precise methods. You are expected to use subject-specific vocabulary that is AO2. And it's not just language analysis. We've got a whole session on that. AO2 is not just language analysis. And they're not using that accurately, and that can result in your mark being lower overall. Don't just say the writer uses words, refer to the techniques, e.g. metaphors, juxtaposition, irony, etc. Obviously, if you are completely stuck, then you can say words. You can talk about the lexical choices of the writer. That is the word choice of the writer if you want to make it sound slightly more sophisticated. If in an exam situation you're panicking and thinking, I can't remember if it's a simile, a metaphor, personification, you can say imagery. That's kind of a blanket term. If an image is created through whether it's personification, simile, or metaphor, they're going to be creating an image. So if you're panicking and you can't remember exactly and you don't want to just guess, you can talk about imagery, but try not to just say words or phrases. Obviously, that's a last resort. So as an example, rather than saying Shakespeare uses words to show Lady Macbeth is powerful, it sounds rubbish, doesn't it? But you'd be surprised at how many students will write that sort of thing. Say Shakespeare uses an imperative when Lady Macbeth commands the spirits to unsex me here, highlighting her desire to transcend, so go beyond her traditional gender role. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, make a vocabulary bank of literary terms and memorize them. Ensure that every paragraph uses precise terminology at least once. And you need to be practicing these daily almost and reminding yourself of these, because you would not believe how many students get to A level and they can't remember what a verb or a noun is. And it's not your fault. We need to constantly practice things and repeat things in order for them to stick. And you probably ask your parents or guardians what an adjective, a verb, a simile, a metaphor is, and they might stand there and go, I can't quite remember. And that's obviously not their fault. They haven't learned it for years and years. But my point is, you need to keep practicing these. And we do post on our Instagram stories daily terminology for you to revise, and they're all there in Instagram highlights. So do check those out as a free revision resource. So another thing that students miss out on is structural analysis. Now, it mentions this in the mark scheme, and this is a part of AO2, so language, form, and structure. Now, we often think about this with the poetry, and students tend to miss this less with the poetry, but the same applies to your literature text. And obviously in language analysis, you would also be, in the language paper, you would be looking at the structure as well. But many students focus on language analysis, but forget to analyze the structure of a text, which is equally important for AO2 and can make you stand out. Most students will just focus on the lexical choices of the writer and fail to think about the structural choice of the writer or even the form that the writer has chosen as well. So consider how the writer organizes their ideas, uses foreshadowing, or creates tension through structural choices. So as an example, in Macbeth, Shakespeare's use of short staccato sentences when Macbeth sees Banquo's ghost, "Avaunt and quit my sight," reflects his fragmented state of mind and builds tension within the scene. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, when analysing a scene or chapter, always ask yourself, why did the writer choose to structure it this way? We want to be thinking about the writer consciously doing things and think about why that is the case. Look for shifts in tone, pace, and narrative perspective. And then also number 6, overloading quotations. I have mentioned this in other sessions, but some students think that the more quotes they include, the better their essay. However, quality trumps quantity. So choose 1 or 2 key quotations per paragraph and focus on analysing them in depth. So as an example, instead of listing multiple quotations, choose 1 and really explore it. Obviously, you can use 2 or 3, but start with 1 and really explore that before rushing to the next. So for instance, look at how the word vaulting in Vaulting Ambition suggests an uncontrolled, almost reckless leap towards power, mirroring Macbeth's descent into moral chaos. So a grade 8 or 9 tip here would be to always go beyond the quotation. Ask yourself once again, why did the writer choose this specific word or image? We talked about that in other sessions as well. But interrogate why the writer has picked a particular word. How does it link to the wider themes of the text? Another thing that a lot of students neglect is SPAG, so spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And your marks can be affected by your technical accuracy. In literature, this is going to be affected on some questions, but not others. But in language, your language is worth, the technical accuracy is worth 20% of language. So ensure you proofread for common mistakes such as comma splices, run-on sentences, and misused apostrophes. It's really important to give yourself that checking time at the end of an exam. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, if you're aiming for the highest grades, clarity of expression is key. Sentences should be varied and free of errors, and punctuation should be used to enhance your meaning. And then another thing that students miss out on is not making connections. So in questions that require you to compare texts, so for example, the poetry or language paper 2, question 4, students often discuss one text, then the other, but fail to compare them throughout. And we see this all the time. Now, this doesn't mean you're not going to get any marks, but for the top grades and the best responses, they are comparing it throughout. So they do not just deal with one text and the other, or one poem then the other. They are comparing it throughout. And you should draw explicit links or obvious links between and across text within your paragraphs. And when I say across text, this doesn't just, when I say making connections, it doesn't just have to be when you have to compare two texts. You can make links within text. So you can compare the beginning of the text, the end of the text. You can compare what a character is like at the beginning to the end. Making links across text is also a really, really valuable way of pushing yourself towards the top of the mark scheme. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, use comparative sentences when you are being asked to compare. So similarly, in contrast, while this poem presents this poem presents this, to make seamless links between the text. Or across the text, you might, as I said, you might like to compare. So a weak version of a comparison could be Shakespeare uses words to show that Macbeth is ambitious. That's very boring. We talked about that earlier. This shows he wants power later on. Very dull, very boring. An improved version could be Shakespeare's use of the metaphor of vaulting ambition illustrates Macbeth's reckless desire for power. The present participle adjective vaulting implies that his ambition is uncontrolled, much like the destructive leap he takes when he murders Duncan not long after this. So I'm making a connection across the text. So between that quotation, I'm linking it to what happens later on in the text. And you can even make links between the language. We might like to look in an Inspector Calls about how at the beginning, Sheila talks about the ring and she says that she'll never let it out of her sight, not even for an instant. And then by the end, she's much more assertive when she says, no, I must think. So think about the difference in the language that the character uses, the way that they present themselves, the way that the writer has presented them, and why that is the case and what that shows about characters or themes as they develop across text. So we want to make links between texts if we're being asked to compare two texts, but also within and across text if we really want to show that we are pushing towards the top of the mark scheme with those really insightful, thoughtful ideas about text and that conceptualized response. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, always strive for clarity and precision in your analysis. Connect your ideas smoothly and explain how your chosen evidence supports your argument. And then just as some final thoughts, so common mistakes are often small, but they do add up. So avoiding them can raise your mark by several grades. So pay attention to details because they make all the difference. Don't think, oh, I just want to spend 5 minutes writing more when you know there are 4 marks up for grabs for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Far better to spend those 5 minutes checking over and proofreading because you could be losing easy marks there. And just going over all of these things, making sure you've got a conclusion, the things that I've mentioned throughout this session, and then just try it yourself. Go back through a piece of your work and see whether you've made any of these common mistakes or fallen into any of these common pitfalls yourself in your own writing. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. If you have found it useful, be sure to check out the other free sessions and do check out our website as well. And don't forget to follow us on social media.